interesting, a little exciting, and not boring and drab, and we don't want to go on and on about misinformation. So I think what I want to do is just talk to people about the different kinds of misinformation that exist. Do we understand misinformation ka matlab kya hota hai? What kind of misinformation do we face? And also to talk to the students in the room, because we have now a generation that is hyper connected. आप दिन में ऐसा 1 मिनट नहीं है जब फोन छोड़ के साइड में रख के कुछ बात कर सकते हैं. Our friends are online, our parents are online, our entertainment is online, our love life is online. Everything that we do is now online. And because now everything that we do is online, what does it mean when it comes to tackling misinformation and for the kind of misinformation that has tangible physical effects, right? So this panel is going to focus on the conundrum of misinformation, the contrary nature of misinformation, and the relationship that we have with information vis-a-vis misinformation. That's a lot of I's and M's, so we'll start the conversation with Amitabh. And I want Amitabh to share some case stories, because I know you work in this field, you do trainings, you were one of the first few who did the revolution about hashtags, to talk about the kind of cases, the diversity you've seen when it comes to misinformation, the stupid ones, the really important ones, and the way that people have tackled misinformation vis-a-vis their social identities.
All right, thank you. And thank you all of you. I guess too much traffic outside, that's why you're still waiting, but very kind of you. Misinformation and my work goes back to 2012, when we started a campaign called Keep It Real. Right? And back then life was very simple, because we used to think misinformation, like everything else, is about volume. If you have thousands of posts, it is very important. If you have one post, it is not that important. Now, just a quiz question. We just had elections in India, the biggest one ever, democratic. What do you think, how many deepfake misinformation was circulated across India? How many? I just want a number, just a guess. Anybody? Any guess? Yeah, loudly. 100 million? What did you say? You think 5? 100 million and 5, that's quite a diversity. Anybody else? More than? 50. Okay. Do you know how much vote swing do you need to win an election? Anybody? Just one vote? In percentage, it's 3%. So the way misinformation works is it's a seed of an idea in your mind. Once the idea has been sown, people just need to sprinkle it with similar ideas, and it keeps on growing. There are many things I can tell you. You've heard breakfast is the most important meal of the day. How many people have heard this? It was done by the bacon industry back in the 1930s. It's not scientific. You know the Santa Claus we see? It's created by Coca-Cola. It's not what Santa Claus is. Trust me, not even close to that. So, we live in misinformation, we thrive in it. It was used for commercial purposes primarily, but now your economical, social, political, medical conversations are swaying that way. And I'll leave it here for the other panelists and come back to this.
Thank you. I think what I also then want to focus on is the fact that when we talk about misinformation, the narrative is always about something that's a lie, that's fake, something that you may be spreading with malintention, but also something that you may just be gossiping about, right? So when it comes to understanding misinformation that actually enters into a state of hurt, how do we navigate that space? Are we doing it with an intention to be hurting someone? Are we doing it with the intention of not hurting someone, but just having a good laugh? And especially when all of this is online, where you can't see the other person, you can't look at their expressions, you can't actually sit around and laugh about it. How do we navigate that space? I want to ask this question to Professor, because I know that you're working with students who I'm 100% sure lie to you every day.
Thank you. Thanks to all of you for being here at the end of a long day. So we'll try and keep it simple and brief. No, I mean, the basic premise of the panel was also that while digital media have brought about a great deal of freedom of expression on online platforms and portals, whereas traditional media came with a lot of gatekeepers who would control the flow of information, sometimes, not to the benefit of the receivers, but online platforms opened up that space in terms of freedom of expression. But along with that came, as we all realized in the last 4 or 5 years, quite intensely, digital media can do all kinds of things. I mean, it can amplify echo chambers. You belong to groups where you find like-minded people that you believe, everybody is voting for Kamala Harris or whatever until you get the result. And there is a spread of false information, sometimes deliberately, what we call disinformation, not so much as misinformation. And it complicates efforts to promote and foster informed dialogue through online platforms, which was in a way embedded in these technologies, right? That's being denied. And the challenge really is how do we balance the need for this kind of open communication with the risks of harm, the risks of abuse or manipulation that comes with it, right? I mean, so while it has expanded opportunities for free expression, civic engagement, ensuring that these benefits are not undermined by misinformation and disinformation, or at the other end, by excessive state regulation, curbing free expression. I mean, that's really the challenging space in which we are today with respect to misinformation.
Thank you, sir. I think because sir mentioned that we also have to understand the difference between information that is available for consumption and information that can be exploited. Living in this state of panopticon, where everybody is hyper-connected, surveillance laws have gone insane, and everybody actually is just self-surveilling also, like constantly. Now we're online, we're sharing our locations with everyone, we're sharing photos, we're constantly posting pictures of where we're going, and there's so much information that's being shared that can be manipulated, that can be misinformed, that can be malinformed. I just wanted to ask, when it comes to this space of understanding the ethos of misinformation, do you think that it has changed because of the kind of digital access that urban spaces like ours have? And what kind of difference do you see when you talk to different communities about this challenge particularly?
A very good evening, everyone. So when I started reading about the topic, there was a lot of articles, anecdotes, and even literature. And as Sir mentioned that, there is talk about misinformation, disinformation. So in general, I will use this term which is called as unauthentic information. And as I was kind of thinking about it, two examples came to my mind. One is very historical, and the other is relatively modern, or quite modern, I would say. But in both the cases, the source of information is very authentic. So I think most of us are aware of Mahabharata, right? And do you remember how Dronacharya died? So if you see, Yudhishthira, who is supposed to be the epitome of honesty, he declared Ashwathama is dead. And he whispered Ashwathama the elephant. Right? Now coming from Yudhishthira, Dronacharya never doubted it. Right? So he left his weapons and he was beheaded by Drishtadumna, who was Draupadi's brother. So the Pandavas scored a point, but the aftermath was even more dangerous. Now, Dronacharya's son, Ashwathama, he became an arch enemy of the Pandavas. And on the last day of the battle, he just decimated their second generation without any qualms. And I sometimes wonder how the creators of Mahabharata had the vision to realize what kind of effect disinformation can have. The other example that came to my mind was that, in today's networked community, there's a lot of emphasis that is given on feedback, rating, right? And all with a very good intent because we want to make objective decisions. Now, there is an app called MyGate, which many of these urban communities use, and that has a feature where you can rate your service providers. all done with a very good intent, right? But I sometimes see that this is also done with the intention of taking revenge. Like suppose you don't like a cook or a driver, you give them so bad feedback that their rating gets screwed, and these poor people, they are not able to get decent jobs. Now, this is the case of one-way feedback. Now, companies like Uber, Ola, Urban Company, they have kind of democratized feedback, because not only can the user give feedback, the user is rated as well. So even there, a lot of times I've seen that the service providers will unabashedly come and tell you, ma'am, please give me a good rating, because otherwise I will lose my customers. And we end up doing that, right, for two reasons. Number one, we really don't want them to lose their customers. And number two, because our rating might get screwed as well, and we might not get good services. So if you see that, in both these cases, like it is supposed to be very objective evaluation of people based on their rating. So it is supposed to be a very authentic source, but we still become prey of disinformation and also misinformation in some cases. So I'll stop here and, pass the mic to you.
Thank you. I think very naturally when we're talking about this, we also have to talk about the fact that information that we consume is a privilege, especially for all of us, right? We work with communities who receive no information about everyday life, about ration, about food, about water. They're at the most periphery of information consumption that we can think about, right? So when we consume that information, I just want to understand that we do take it for granted, and I don't want an answer to that question. But I want to understand, what do you think are the most common mistakes that we make? Like for example, when I read a new, an article or a piece of information, am I just supposed to think that it's real immediately? Do I look for red flags? What kind of red flags do I look at? And I think I want to address this to Amitabh, because he's got the most experience in this field.
This is a complex one. I think couple of things. Number one, we read too little. Right, so the 30-second reel, the 60-second reel has made life too simple. 5 steps and you're an entrepreneur, right? You become a professor within 60 seconds. You can cook within 1 minute. None of that is true. So I think the depth of reading and understanding, and this is where velocity is not everything. Time is also important. That is part one. Part number two, because in this session we also have to speak about freedom of expression. So definitions are very different, right? For us, it was a freedom struggle. For the British, they were just teaching us how to become civilized, right? Many people who we call terrorists are freedom fighters for other people. For us, what is freedom of expression might be abuse for somebody else. For us, what is a joke might offend somebody else, and that's exactly the country we are living in. What I am treating as a language of communication for everybody, many people might not be understanding it because this is a foreign language we speak in. So definitions are a problem. And the last part, and this is the most important part, most of us, especially young folks, and researchers show this in India as well, are consuming information through social media. Social media is a private company. Private company runs for profit. So anything that does not get views, and this could be the best thought process of the best professor in the world, but because it won't get views because it's usually complex, will be thrown back. And an influencer saying the same thing in 2-3 lines, completely absurd, will be thrown in front of you. And the only thing we tend to see is, oh, million views. Well, million views can come on total garbage as well. Right? The best speech over here does not have the same amount of views if you start abusing on the middle of the street. So please initiate, and when you said, what decisions we should make, be very, very careful of the sources. Earlier, a panelist said a very good thing, which was garbage in, garbage out. The brain is just like that. You put in garbage, you start believing it, and your algorithm is like that. None of you have searched for dinosaur. Just take out your phone and say dinosaur 10 times, it will start showing you pictures of dinosaur. That is how easy it is to manipulate the algorithm. So choose your sources, give yourself time. Absolutely nothing is done in 60 seconds. Even Maggie takes more than 2 minutes. right? And please go beyond social media. There is a lot of good media out there. There are libraries, there are books, there are conversations like this. So there is a world beyond social media, although the very big companies, and I work for a few of them, don't want you to believe this. But there is a big world out there. So I guess those are 3 points I would like to make.
Thank you. Now that you've shifted the conversation to freedom of expression, I think we also should focus on the fact that right now freedom of expression is something that's challenged on a daily basis. It depends on your socio-cultural identity, your caste and class privilege, and also understanding if you have access to this kind of narrative, right? A lot of us in this room now do not look at a newspaper or listen to the news on the TV because you know that it's not democratic anymore. It's not actually something that's been fact-checked. It's also, like you mentioned, that information is being commercialized, but it's also being politicized. So what are the political effects of barring that freedom of expression, putting it in a cage, and then selling it back to you, saying that you can be free on social media, but you can't be free in your understanding or your freedom of expression in real life? And I think I want to ask you that.
Yeah, I just wanted to respond a little bit, indirectly to what you're saying, picking up on the previous question. I mean, I know that the so-called WhatsApp university is full of students and professors from our social class. I think one should be more concerned about the impact that misinformation has on particularly vulnerable communities, communities that are on the margins of society, indigenous communities, the poor, the Dalits, the religious minorities. Misinformation, one may not realize it immediately, but it actually intensifies existing inequalities. It promotes a lot of mistrust within communities. For example, false health information, such as anti-vaccine propaganda. Now, of course, we have an anti-vaxxer who is probably going to become the health secretary of the US. But that kind of anti-vaccine propaganda can disproportionately affect marginalized groups, in particular, those who have limited healthcare access, and thereby worsening our existing health disparities. So we should be more concerned about those communities. Similarly, misinformation targeting specific ethnic groups or religious groups can fuel discrimination, stigmatization, social isolation. I mean, we are seeing what's happening in the Northeast, in Manipur, around interreligious violence in Delhi and its neighborhoods. It actually deepens existing social divisions in society. So I think one of the questions that were circulated for the panel is to look at what can we do about misinformation targeted to those communities. I'm hoping we can navigate a conversation towards that, because see, those are the communities that can't afford to do a lot of your cross-checking, looking at other sources and so on. They depend on easy-to-get sources of information that are more sensationalistic, that are more dramatic. They consume that a lot more eagerly and have no recourse to alternative sources of information.
Thank you. So actually, that was going to be my next question. But when you actually understand the way that misinformation can affect a person, and especially a person that comes from a vulnerable community or a marginalized community, the effects are very tangible. The physical, the mental, the debilitating, and they take away a lot of freedom of expression that's linked to, coming online as well. So I want to address this to Shruti, because she works with the grassroots communities in India and has been tackling the discourse of misinformation. Like Professor said, what do you do? How do you do it? What are the challenges that you face on the ground when you talk to people like this? And have you seen disparities in their narratives, their response as well?
Okay, so to begin with, I would like to put a question to all of us. How do we preserve this freedom while safeguarding communities through the danger of misinformation? So, while there are a lot of challenges rural India face, And three major challenges which I can say is lack of infrastructure, lack of information, and information on timely basis. Also, this limited digital literacy. So we recently implemented a program called Safeguarding Rural India through Critical Digital Literacy, where we have created a cadre of 480 rural women who then got equipped with infrastructure, and we provide them trainings on MIL kit, Media and Information Literacy kit. Then we equip them with how to recognize cognitive biases, how to fact check through different media like reverse images, and how to check the how to discriminate between the influential biases. So there is a cultural barrier, and people do believe on that. So a lot of influences, biases come into their mind. So during COVID, on social media, there was a false claim that through poultry, it's basically a poultry which is somewhere, viruses, through poultry, virus has been associated. So due to that, there is an economic crisis in the poultry sector. So in rural community, there is a lot of misinformation through mouth to mouth, and definitely social media is responsible, but mouth to mouth publicity is also a major chunk on that. We have one case story on it. I would like to request to play that.
ये कॉल आपके बैंक से संबंधित है। आपके अकाउंट नंबर पर 1 लाख रुपए की लॉटरी लगी है।
दीदी, पता है मेरे मोबाइल में ना एक लिंक आया था।
मैम, आपके फ़ोन पर एक OTP आया होगा।
एक कंपनी से मैसेज आया था कि आपको 20,000 महीना मिलेगा।
सर, अपनी मार्कशीट, बैंक स्टेटमेंट इस नंबर पर भेज दीजिए।
गरिमा, तुम्हें पता है तुम्हारा फेक अकाउंट बना हुआ है?
धन्यवाद।
10 बजे के आसपास मेरे पास कॉल आया कि मैं आपका सर जी बोल रहा हूँ और आप वो राशि मतलब इतना राशि डाल दो करके। तो मैंने वो कंफर्म नहीं कर पाई और मैं डाल दी उसको। तब मेरे को लगा कि ये फर्जी कॉल है और मैं फर्जी मैं पैसा डाल दी करके।
ग्रामीण व्यक्ति सही मायने में बहुत भोले रहते हैं मैम। सोशल मीडिया के माध्यम से ही ऐसी बहुत खबरें हैं जो कि बेवजह फैलाई जाती है।
सबसे पहले तो हमारा फोकस रहता है गवर्नमेंट की स्कीम के ऊपर कि गवर्नमेंट की जो भी स्कीम बन रही है, चाहे वो केंद्र सरकार के लेवल पर हो या फिर राज्य सरकार के लेवल पर हो, वो उनका सही क्रियान्वयन करने के लिए सही सूचनाएं उनको मिल सके। ये है कि उनके कम्युनिटी में पकड़ हम लोग देखते हैं कि कम्युनिटी में वो काम कर पाएंगे कि नहीं कर पाएंगे।
मेन उद्देश्य है एक महिलाओं का उद्यमी बनाना और डिजिटल के माध्यम से सभी को जानकारी देना। डीएफ में जुड़ने से पहले फेक न्यूज़ क्या होता है, कैसे कोई किसी के झांसे में आ जाते हैं, इसके बारे में मेरे को बिल्कुल भी पता नहीं था। जो 15 महिलाओं को मैंने खुद ट्रेनिंग दी है, जिसके माध्यम से ही मुझे भी पता चला कि फेक न्यूज़ क्या होता है।
एक हमारा सांप सीढ़ी का खेल है जिसमें हम ये बताते हैं कि कैसे फेक न्यूज़ बूस्टर फेक न्यूज़ फैला रहा है, उसके समाज में क्या दुष्प्रभाव फैल सकते हैं। डिजिटल सेफ्टी और सिक्योरिटी को लेकर जब हमने नुक्कड़ नाटक के थ्रू कम्युनिटी में समझाया बताया तो एक कनेक्शन बना।
आइए हम आपको एक नुक्कड़ नाटक के माध्यम से ऑनलाइन छेड़छाड़ किस प्रकार होता है उसके बारे में बताते हैं। ये है हमारे शिकारी बाबू। और ये है बसंती।
मैं अपना उदाहरण देती हूँ कि आप लोग के पास अगर फर्जी कॉल आए तो आप सीधी से उसका कॉल कट कर देना। अब मैं आपको नहीं जानती, ऐसे पैसे थोड़ी किसी की मैं डाल दूंगी करके।
15 महिलाएं 15 गांव की है, तो धीरे धीरे वो लोग भी अपने गांव को जागरूक कर रहे हैं कि क्या सही है क्या गलत है करके।
कम्युनिटी में एक महिला को यदि हम लोग साक्षर कर दें तो उसकी पूरी कम्युनिटी उससे प्रभावित होती है।
दीदी की जगह स्मार्ट दीदी हो गए हैं वो लोग, जो सभी के बारे में उनको अब जानकारी हो रही है।
हेलो दीदी।
हर दीदी सक्षम बनना चाहती है, लेकिन वही है उसको सूचना की कमी होता है। अगर अच्छी से सूचना मिल जाए तो हर दीदी आगे बढ़ना चाहती है।
So the approach emphasizes on critical thinking, fact checking and responsible online behavior. Thank you.
Thank you. I think continuing on this path, I would just like last thoughts on the fact that, misinformation is very insidious. The nature is very insidious, right? Misinformation affects you in a very different way, but it affects us and the people from vulnerable communities both. It affects them doubly, triply, quadruply, because they're caught in the intersections of their identity, their gender, their caste, their class, and then understanding that misinformation is a global issue, then it's a national issue, then it's a local issue, and then it's a panchayat issue, right? So when you have so many intersections just coming after you, how do you tackle that space? Like when you say that you want to bring this message to the vulnerable communities or understand how misinformation can actually affect them or challenge their freedom of expression, what are we even talking about when we say something like that?
So I think that information has to be corrected at the source. So what I feel is that during our school days, we had a course called moral science, which helped us to distinguish between what is right and what is wrong. So why don't we introduce a course like moral data or whatever be the name, where the people who start generating information, particularly the digital natives, they are taught what is right and wrong. The other thing I feel is that we know that data is the new oil, right? Oil cannot be used in its crude form. It has to be refined. Like that, data, before it is exposed to for general use, for consumption, it has to be refined, it has to be cleaned. And that process somehow has to be institutionalized. So like we have, something like ISI guaranteed or ISO certified. If we can have an agency which can go about certifying data, maybe that could be a solution. Again, this is probably a very broad question to us. Maybe some answer will come in the future.
Thank you.
Yeah, but I look at the other side of it. See, misinformation is not happening just by chance. It's a very big business. During elections, we were detecting deepfakes. Had we started making deepfakes, we would have made more money for the next 10 years. So we need to attack the business of it. Currently, if you put misinformation out there, it's to promote a product. This product could be political, economical, medical. But there is zero consequence. Even if you find out who made the deepfake, so what? There is not a single law to put them in jail. More than jail, it should be a very big fine. The second we start putting fines, because deepfakes are also monetized by big platforms, it's not happening for free. In European Union, the Digital Services Act says 6% of your global revenue is your fine if we find you promoting any sort of nonsense. In India, DPDPA also has a big fine, but the other ones are, if you use Prime Minister's picture, the fine is 500 rupees. So we need to get real about it. Like the laws, especially for the young ones out there, digital laws of this country are still back in 1893 or something like that. So we need to update them and get the fines so that the profit and the lawyer's fees is lower than the fine. That high, and that will get people excited and doing something more about it.
Yeah, I mean, We need a more multifaceted approach. I mean, there is policy, of course, at a more structural level. I mean, good policies, well-crafted policies can establish clear guidelines for content moderation, urge that there be transparency in algorithmic decision making. Many of us are completely unaware of how it happens, and calling for greater accountability for platforms without overstepping into censorship. Of course, that's a line that governments are quite eager to cross. The European Union's Digital Services Act that you mentioned, I mean, does seek to hold platforms accountable for harmful content, even as they try to safeguard the fundamental rights of people to information. But I think in the context of this, the larger event of which our panel is a part, community networks are also extremely important to combat misinformation. As we have seen in the DEF video, how can we foster grassroots resilience against misinformation? And community networks help us by leveraging local knowledge systems and the trust that communities have to counter false narratives within the communities. I mean, lots of good examples. For example, at a regional level, there is something called Africa Check in Africa, which is doing a great job by incorporating communities into the fact-checking process. Similarly, Alt News collaborates with local actors to debunk misinformation. So we need community-driven efforts a lot more to promote media literacy and critical thinking, which is slightly a medium-term, long-term thing, not a firefighting approach. But we need firefighting approach along with efforts that in the long term build resilience of communities, like the rural digital literacy programs that DEF and others have been doing. They are extremely important to combat misinformation.
Thank you. This is a conversation that I can have like for 4 days straight, but we don't have that kind of time. So I would like to say thank you to the panel. We got a lot of diverse perspectives out there, but I think I wanted this panel to be a little bit of food for thought as well, so all of us can inculcate the critical thinking that we keep saying. So thank you very much for joining us.